Hello, and welcome to Ideas with Diana on this October 10th, 2022. For today's show, it's going to be a little bit of a book review because um, based on current events, are we revisiting the period of July 1965, um, as mentioned in the book by Robert McNamara in retrospect, and in the chapter the deci- the decision the decision to escalate, chapter 7. As a summary reads, the most crucial phase of America's 30-year involvement in Indochina, 6 months between January 28th and June 28th, 1965, saw the United States embark on a course of massive military intervention in Vietnam, an intervention which ultimately destroyed Lyndon Johnson's presidency and polarized America like nothing since the Civil War. How did it happen? Why did we fail to foresee the implications of our actions? What hopes, fears, perceptions, and judgments, accurate and inaccurate, shaped our thinking and actions? This chapter gives answers to these and often asked questions. And I'll proceed to a section which I thought was very important when I read this. Um, Now, when I became aware of McNamara's book, I was at a conference for the Society for Computer Simulation in Phoenix. And that night, what happened was, it was one of the few nights that I actually start going to bars, and I was meeting with some people from the Air Force and other armed services, because there was an open civilian armed services conference, non-classified setting, as was the policy was of SCSN. And at that time, I went and I had a beer with one serviceman, and he was telling me from the Air Force as well. McNamara is supposed to go on TV tonight. This is going to be big. And what happened? We talked a little bit about it, and what happened was basically everyone was wondering what was going to happen, and finally what happened? I got a call. My dad called the hotel, and someone came and bought the phone and says, "Well," he says, "you should go on TV now. He's on now. He's on now." I said, "Well, Dad, it's 7 o'clock in Arizona." He says, "Well, when he gets on TV, you watch it. It's important. Watch it." I said, "Okay, well, Dad." And so, what happened when I watched it? I called my dad back, and I said, "Well, yeah." I said, "We got to get this book." I says, and I asked a few people who I knew, friends of mine in the Air Force. I said, "Well, where can I get it?" He said, "Barnes and Noble." I says, "Well, I don't know if there's a Barnes and Noble." "Yeah, there is one in Brookfield." So I made a point, called my dad, said, "No, when I get back, let's all of us stop over there at Barnes and Noble and get this book." But now let me read the section that I found most interesting when I first read in retrospect. In the midst of the July debates, the president brought to Washington a bipartisan group of elder statesmen who became known as the Wise Men. He called on this group, whose composition differed somewhat from one gathering to another several times. On this occasion, he asked it to review the war's progress and advise them on how to proceed. The Wise Men comprised an impressive group with knowledge, experience, and prestige. On this occasion, they included Dean Acheson, a major architect of U.S. foreign policy during the early Cold War, as Secretary of State to President Truman. Retired five-star General Omar Bradley, another panel member, radiated the quiet, cool professionalism of America's military establishment. John Cowles, liberal Republican, publisher of the Minneapolis Star and Tribune and Look magazine, exemplified the internationalism of leading U.S. newspapers and journals. Attorney and diplomat Arthur Dean, who had served as Eisenhower's negotiator during the Korean armistice talks, shared Cowles' liberal republicanism and dedication to bipartisan internationalization. Hint, hint, hint. Nudge, nudge. Lash Gilpatrick symbolized the continuities between JFK's and LBJ's stewardship of national security affairs. Millionaire industrialist Paul Hoffman, who had headed the Marshall Plan, typified American business know-how harnessed in the service of American foreign policy. Distinguished Harvard chemist George Kwiatkowski personified the interrelationship of science and politics in the nuclear era, a sort of a precursor to Carl Sagan. Duke University law professor Arthur Lawson, who had served several presidents since 1933, signified the lines between academia and government forged during World War II. Robert Lovett had served with distinction as Undersecretary of State of Secretary of Defense in the Truman administration. Lovett's World War II colleagues and former American pro-consul occupied Germany, John McCloy, completed the impressive roster. All these men projected the determination, confidence, and assurance of a generation steeped in the successes of World War II and the early Cold War. Just to add that there are people also in Russia who fit this list of basically have been steeped in experience of war in World War II, as Russia lost 18 million people during World War II. A sub-panel of this larger group, Bradley, Gilpatrick, Kwiatkowski, Larson, McCloy, met with Dean, Tommy, Bill, and me on the morning of July 8th. We briefed them thoroughly, answered their questions, and urged them to report the frank opinions to the panel. Frank opinions to the panel, not candy-coated, not fake news, not managed news. All but Larson advised committing whatever forces we needed to prevent South Vietnam from falling under communist control. Several members, in fact, criticized our previous actions as too restrained. They expressed their views later that day that to the full panel, which, except for Hoffman, fully agreed, Acheson and Arthur Dean, in particular, strongly resisted Hoffman's call for negotiation. This was no time to turn over our Far East policy to the UN or anyone else, said Arthur Dean. McCloy, speaking for the group, told Dean and me, "We are about to get our noses bloodied, but you got to do it. You got to go on." In a way, it sounds like basically people realized that there was a better option, but basically we're stuck in groupthink. That evening, Acheson, Bradley, Coles, Arthur Dean, Lovett, and McCloy met with the president in the cabinet room. Acheson reported to former President Truman a few days later, and after listening to Johnson complain about his problems, I blew my top with him, that he had no choice except to press on, With this lead, my colleagues came thundering in like a charge of Scots Greys at Waterloo, A reference to the Napoleonic era of where the Scots were involved in the Battle of Waterloo, and it was a very bloody battle, many people dead. Bob Lovett, usually cautious and well was all out. And of course, Bradley left no doubt that after he was with me all the way, I think, we scored. A football analogy meaning that basically that the policy discussed went through and that basically others were on board. However, he goes on to say, but they failed to score, in parentheses, on their belief strongly expressed to Dean Rusk and me that the administration must fully explain the military situation and the need for far more troops to the American public. Coles and Lovett both faulted the president for painting too rosy a picture of the war. Again, this comes back to 2022. Are we painting too rosy a picture? Or like in the European squads, have we picked a leader who walks on water and does not bleed, to use an analogy from Richard III? Behold the God who bleeds. And it's interesting that I find interesting when Zelensky made this thing about preemptive attack on Russia. When he backtracked, suddenly he wished to speak to the press in English after all these times of speaking through an interpreter. As I said in other shows, I distrust people who hide behind interpreters. I'd rather hear them speak in English, and even if the English isn't perfect, because I know it's their words, their thoughts, and it's not the interpreter or it's not some sort of script. Well, now just finishing up, About this time, congressional conservatives began pressing for large increases in defense spending to support the added programs underway and further efforts then in the project. Now, compared to today, many conservatives are questioning, where's this money going? Where are these weapons going to be on the black market? What type of controls do we have? Even like comments made by Rand Paul and the Rand Paul Institute for Peace, wondering about basically about this military mobilization now chosen by it's so strange. Neoliberals in the Biden administration or neocons working with the Biden administration. Representatives Gerald Ford and Melvin Laird urged a supplemental defense appropriation of $1 to $2 billion, and a call-up of at least 200,000 reserves. Well, today NATO has 40,000 troops on the border ready to go. I just wonder. Well, I'll comment that after this. Senator Dirksen also urged the president to seek additional authority and more money, a good deal of money. Meanwhile, the Great Society had reached a critical juncture. The Senate had finally approved Medicare and will soon enter conference other major Great Society legislation, including immigration reform, the anti-poverty program, aid to Appalachia, and the Clean Air Act had yet to be acted upon. President Johnson believed higher defense appropriations would kill the proposals for his great social advance since the Great Deal. Today, we see his actions as a subterfuge, which is commonly called deceit, but in the process, we overlook his deep desire to address society's ills. On July 14th, 1965, as I prepared to leave for Saigon, Johnson met with the Newsweek editor James Cannon. Cannon queried him about his overlying goal as president, to make life better and more enjoyable and more significant for all people, he replied. When Cannon asked him how he squared this with his more conservative Senate record, he said, I am aware of the problems of more people than before. I am more sensitive to the injustices we have put on the Negro. Please forgive us. This was in 1995, before considerations and social concerns were addressed. For instance, because I see and talk to him more now, I am less selfish, a little more selfish. In this place, you can't go any higher, and the only thing you want to do is what's right. Many who read these words may view them as self-serving propaganda, the effort of a consummate actor to lead people to see him as different than he really was. I do not believe that this was the case. It is sad that LBJ's frequent efforts to dissemble robbed his reputation of deep responsibility he felt to right the wrongs that affected many of our people. Now, when I read this, what happened was my parents and I talked a lot about this when I read this book in '95, because at that time I was working for the Society of Computer Simulation as Associate Vice President of Emergency Management and Chairman of Emergency Management. So the thing is, what happened was I was a military contractor both to the Navy and Air Force at that time, with the Air Force and liaison with the Air Force. Even with the next day, it's interesting. Next day at the 7 o'clock breakfast that we had before the conference for all the speakers to gather, I talked with a few friends, like I said, that I knew in the Air Force, and I asked them about what they thought, and they said, "God, that was breathtaking. That was like a load of bricks that finally came off our backs." And the reason why is because what happened was some of them had served during that time, and they remembered basically the attitudes, their officer training and everything at that point. And it was like, well, maybe there's hope that we can do something to move forward past the groupthink, past what was mentioned when McNamara said, let's go back, when McNamara said that about basically that LGB's frequent efforts to dissemble robbed his reputation of the deep responsibility felt to right the wrongs that affected so many of our people. And this can go back to thinking of like in basically Richard III. Behold, the God who does not walk on water, the God who bleeds. And this is a case where Johnson was found out was he is the God who bleeds, the God who does not walk on water. Yet in 2022, we still have some people who are thought by darlings of the European salons and the managed press and some of the Western press as having walked on water. And it is a special audience when he speaks in English, as what he did a few weeks ago to basically re-clarify what he said, because he claims that interpreted his Ukrainian incorrectly, even though many foreign press have professional interpreters who are expert linguists and expert interpreters. So no, they didn't correct it incorrectly. It's like someone basically firing a missile and hitting a civilian target and says, well, we made a mistake. No, you didn't get your sums right. You have a computer program, plus your people are taught how to manually compute the where that missile is going to go. So you didn't get your sums wrong. The sums are right. You're just trying to cover your tracks. And this goes down to something about leading into this. Milgram. When we talk, Milgram asked, well, what is the reason why people are obedient to authority? And this is not relevant to one side or another, but it's relevant to many things of groupthink or many things of bad decision making. Let's sort of go through some of the. Let me just read some of the experiments that prove this theory. One is remote victim. Victim is attacked remotely, so they don't know who's doing attacking, so they blame someone that's nearby who really isn't the aggressor. Voice feedback. When you speak improperly, you hear this. I hear that. Proximity. Someone stands close to you and gives you funny looks to sort of make you nervous or stutter so you don't speak properly. Touch proximity. You really shouldn't be saying that, my dear. Isn't that your time of the month? A new baseline condition, what was mentioned in retrospect regarding the 1965 period. Change of personnel, again, the 1965 period. Closeness of authority, 1965 period. Women as subjects, that is a case of basically blackmail, dirty tricks, making up that a professor is having a relationship with a student to discredit what they say, or an academic is having. The victim's limited context. Again, this is like in the trial, like in one movie I saw on Google on Netflix about basically a trial against Google where one software company developed a Sovereign Earth project where you could zoom in and it shows what would have happened if they would have gone to trial against Google. And it showed that basically limited context because the jury did not, I don't think, understood code. And I just, some people wonder basically if there really should be a special court set up for software where the jurist and the jury members actually are programmers and understand code so they know what they're looking at, so they can't be swayed or manipulated by someone who's a better communicator. Institutional context. Again, and even today, basically with the European salons in the, again, I hate to use this analogy, the pointed heads of Europe. Subject free to choose shock level. Now this gets back to the Ukraine with what's happened with the Ukraine government. They're choosing the shock level. Like before, basically it was basically arms behind the back fighting a conventional war. Now, basically, it's of pilotless planes and B-1s of 2022. Even during World War II, the V-1s caused a lot of shock and awe and terror to the English people and almost made them surrender. It was so shocking that the British government did not allow the knowledge of that to be known to the British public until 1965. The reason why is because the V-1s or the buzz bombs were like this. I'm going to get something later. Like this pen. But the most scary part was when it went boom. That was the most scary part, because when the engines cut off, all those people knew that basically there's going to be a big boom somewhere, and they wouldn't even hear it coming. They could hear it coming within 2 miles, but that when it glided for 2 miles, unless you saw it, you didn't even hear it coming. You didn't even know you were being attacked, compared to the Blitz, where you could hear the Stukas and the bombs dropping. Learner demands to be shocked. This is a case where someone basically who is supposed to be the teacher suddenly realizes they made a mistake, so to repent, they say, well, I want to be shocked, just like an analogy to the Bible of someone saying, well, I want to be hurt because basically I did something wrong. An ordinary man gives orders. Now, I could go quite far with this, but I'm going to restrain myself. What does it mean by an ordinary man gives orders? Someone who never was in a management position suddenly put in a top management position, or someone who works as a repertory player is somehow put in a top management position of a company or a country. Well, what happens? So that makes for a nice movie. That makes for a wonderful story. Makes for a wonderful sitcom. However, in real life, it's very horrible, because this person does not have the background culturally, ethically, educationally to understand what they're doing. Because the hardest part of management is not to use power, because what happens, every time, like I say, like my dad told me when I was when I was 17, he said, well, you're going to become old enough to go into the bars, and as you know, we're a management family in Kenosha, not a labor family. So when you go in the bars, you're going to have a lot of people chastise you and try to bait you and goat you. Goat you is a Texas term, the same as baiting you. Where someone says, well, oh, hey, look at the executive. He started to come in and meet with the lower people. And what happens is, what you got to do is let it go, let it slide, just have your drink, don't. And because what happens the moment you retaliate, or basically say, well, I'm going to call my attorney, I'm going to do this and this and this, then they say, gotcha. Because basically now basically you've become the ordinary man giving orders, as opposed to executive who knows that you're not supposed to use power to solve things. You're supposed to be able to solve things without power and without swearing, as well as to maintain a civilized conduct when you are meeting people, even those who may be your enemy. One thing I give the Ukraine foreign minister for credit for, when he was on 60 Minutes and even on the NewsHour, one newscast asked us, well, would you meet with Vladimir Putin, who is considered the devil? He says, first, I'm a professional, so let's stop referring to Vladimir Putin as the devil. We're professionals. Second, as foreign minister, I would meet with anyone who would be willing to talk and discuss options. Now, that's what a professional does. A professional does not think of people as devils. A professional does not think of himself as the chief of an orthodox church, or basically, and also a professional realizes that in war for history, there's the past generation's war and the current and the present. Just because one group suffered mercilessly in World War II because of the hands of the Nazis, does that mean that the current generation has the right to continue that war? No, they don't. And even Gene Roddenberry mentioned that in Farpoint. Errors and sins of past generations cannot be prosecuted on to the current generation. Period. Another thing going on, the subject as a bystander, authority as victim, an ordinary man commanding, which goes back, two authorities, contradictory commands, two authorities, one as a victim, two peers as a rebel, a peer minister shock. So you can see Milgram really had it right when he talked about this, and his studies was done shortly after World War II and throughout the 1960s and 70s. Now, another book. To my viewers, this is going to be a little bit of a longer program than normal because it's important. I think this information gets out. This is by Charles Handy, The Gods of Management: The Changing Work of Organizations. So let's go into what he means by the four gods of management. Okay, he goes into four gods of management. One is going by culture and the gods. So let's go by the god first. The gods are Zeus, Apollo, Athena, and Dionysus. The culture. Zeus is a club represented by a web. Apollo is a roll. Athena is a task represented by a grid. And Dionysus is a circle with a bunch of loose dots. Now Zeus is the god of the thunderbolt and the reward. You do good, here's your big reward. You do bad, thunderbolts, missiles. And also Zeus is a club. So it reminds me of basically when I was down at Evanston and attending a condo meeting. It's interesting. We had the condo meeting and supposed to start 7 o'clock. I came down like about 15 to just because the one person I stayed on, he wanted me to express a viewpoint. So start at 7. Okay, pop went to corks on wine, the Baileys and other stuff. And it's like, yeah, this is good Baileys. Yeah. Looked at my watch. Well, it's 7:45. Oh no, we'll start to be in good time. There's not that much. We'll start to be in good time. And 8:50. 8:15. Well, I guess we should do the meeting now. Well, anything to discuss? No. Can I hear a yay or nay about dismiss the meeting? Yay, and then before I could say anything, meeting dismissed. Wow. So you wonder if the meeting was really a drinking party or a club. And this reminds me of when I consider the news media of the managed media and the fake media, and also some other things that where the newscasters I feel are staying with the hands behind the back. It reminds me of a club. Now the one with Apollo's a role. Everyone has a role. So basically, one person's goal is to be the salon head that comes and speaks to everybody, like basically VL. Another person's goal is to be basically the learned committee, as I refer to as the cone heads of Europe. And Athena is the task. Well, basically, those are the people who are really trying to get the news about what's really going on in this situation and where people are having blinders on. They're trying to help. The Dionysus is the existential, which is interconnected dots. These are some of the leads who think they know things and they post things on Twitter and other stuff, and they think, well, this is maybe this is a good thing, but really study your history, study your books before you really go too far. But the thing about the gods of management is basically there's 4 things. There's different things that unstable, stable, introverted, extroverted. Well, Apollo with his thunderbolts, and Apollo is male management ranges between stable and introverted. Athena with the grid is between stable and extroverted. They're not afraid to speak. They won't have blinders. They won't have the ears shut. They won't be muzzled. So and Zeus, now basically let's go back to Zeus. Zeus is the web, basically between unstable and introverted, because when the web starts to shake or fall apart, it's like, oh my God, our world is falling apart. Our vision of our e-vision is falling apart, or something else. And well, what happens? Guess what? Paradigms change. We changed our paradigm from 1968 during Vietnam. We even changed it before the first Gulf War. We changed it again even at the second Gulf War when we learned of Abu Jalad. Dionysus is unstable and introverted, basically interconnected dots. People, at least who post on social media, maybe like this. It's basically it's like, well, what we really feel we need to express this. Well, that's good. You finally are coming out of your shell, but please read, read again. Read history, but read everyone's history, not just what you're being told to. Read the banned books too. So now the final point that brings this across is, let's use baseball analogy that brings everyone to home plate. And this is a book called The Basis of Fortran. This is actually the first programming book my dad bought for me. He taught me when I was 7 years old at the time, which is amazing when you think in 1969, because most kids 7 years old were not even taught about what a computer was, or even how to program a computer. And just to give an example about the computer programming in my family, I should have got one more pop. Let me get it here. This is my dad's IBM 403 board that he programmed to do unit record when he ran this business. And let me just show the back here. You can see the plug boards and the pins, different sections. What you did is you plugged this into an IBM 403 computer and do unit record. And actually the program was a wired program. That's part of the reason why I have this encased in Saran wrap is the preserver, but you can see the different wires: red for data, other wires for control. And he used this throughout his, but then when he did have a chance to go to Fortran, he went to Fortran. The thing about this book is, this book talks about Fortran using a baseball method, and you can see I put my take on there, Dr. Diana Konecki, as I do support the Human Rights campaign. And Diana, and what happens, you can see chapter 1, ground rules, or some other things. But we're going to read from game 5. So that's now what happens. He puts in different games to discuss things about. It's more about programming. It's also about philosophy and ideas. Now this game is called The Arrogant Judge and the Number Cultist. It's about he's told what happens. People are saying, well, the cultists who are in control, or are considered like the salons, where the salons are saying, oh, you don't know anything. You're not part of our managed news. You're not part of our fake news. You're from the 4 News. You're from RT. You're from some other, and you don't know anything. So we're not going to listen to you. So here's how the story goes. And this is the story many intellectuals, including myself and others, had to endure for all of civilization. After the 4th century BC, there existed a secret cult of men who spent their lives studying number relationships. Each new relationship was jealously guarded from those outside the cult. The number cultists gained their enmity of religious and political leaders. This came about because the cultists attributed moral values to specific numbers. For example, they held that odd numbers were male numbers, whereas even numbers were female numbers. However, the cultists went much further in their beliefs. They outraged the high priest today by attributing their source or beginnings of all things to the number 1, which they simply called unity. It is not surprising, as opposition increased, that some of these number cultists found themselves in extremely hazardous and distressing circumstances. Many were put to death at the hands of unruly mobs. Some were sold into slavery at public markets. Still others were brought before learned judges for public trial. Let me repeat that: learned judges for public trial. Anything similar in 2022? The story that follows concerns one of these public trials. There was a festive expectancy apparent among those spectators lucky enough to gain admittance to the Philadelphia Stadium. This was the third and last day of the public trial of three famous Pythagoras accused of treason to the state for beliefs in the demonic power of numbers. The citizens of Philotas anticipated a verdict of guilty. Shouts of "Death to the cultists" were heard all over the city. For several days, excitement had mounted as the famous judge Hippostratus ridiculed and jeered every attempt of the Pythagoreans to defend their beliefs. Although Hippostratus had grown in stature in the eyes of most of the citizens of Philotas, a handful of trial spectators, those students of Grecian law, realized the judge's popularity was a direct result of his refusal to uphold the rights of the accused as guaranteed by the states. Again, those students of Grecian law realized the judge's popularity was a direct result of his refusal to uphold the rights of the accused as guaranteed by the states. Again, does this sound something similar to what's going on in 2022 and since February 24th? Especially in a country that's supposed to be defending its people and its democracy, we're banning of political parties, and only one party can speak over the TV show, and the leader can only speak in English after he has to defend his position for doing a preemptive strike on Russia. Hippostratus himself had no illusions for the reason of his growing popularity. He hated the Pythagoras, was so intense he was willing to betray the very principles he had sworn to uphold. What he refused to admit was the true reason of his desire for vengeance. Actually, he was intensely jealous of all number cultists. Each of their discoveries of interesting and curious relationships among numbers tended to increase his own feelings of inadequacy and inferiority. Oh boy, that is a big statement. Inadequacy and inferiority. How many readers have been caught by that? I gave you a few books that demonstrated a few. As the public trial progressed, Hippostratus became more and more arrogant. Each denial and refusal to permit the three victims to exercise their rights under Grecian law added to the sense of power and security. Again, basically, not allowing the opposition to speak, banning opposition political parties. Now, on the third and last day of the trial, Hippostratus' false feeling of superiority influenced him in making a decision which would shake the foundations of the ancient world. Looking down at the three helpless number cultists awaiting the death sentence, the arrogant judge addressed the expectant mass of Greeks in the state of Philotas. Citizens of Philotas, we have listened for 3 days to lies and false reasons behind the beliefs of these three Pythagoras standing before us now. We all know that there is but one sense to the infamy and treason. But we also know that death will not stop similar practices of their friends and others like themselves. The only way to put an end to all this treason of this kind is to prove beyond all doubts that the number, facts, and solutions which they seek are merely simple ideas, one which many of us who are not members of the cult can easily understand and solve. Therefore, as a judge, I have decided to delay the death sentence of these traitors while we solve one number problem which each will be allowed to propose. Hear ye then the following rules. Each traitor may propose a set of three numbers which are formed by some number relationship. Those of us who are not members of the cult will try to find the next two numbers of the set. Until the next two numbers are found, these traitors shall be released. My centurions will see that they do not leave the city of Philotas during this time. When the solution is found, the traitor will die. So what happened was the Salon judge and his appointed head court were so arrogant to feel that this now just simple. This can be done by anyone in their quote in group. So let me read on. At the conclusion of the judge's decision, there arose a wild roar from the people in Philotas Stadium. The wisdom of Hippostratus was evident to all. Now, indeed, the number cultists would have to prove the claims to knowing more number secrets than anyone else. The three helpless victims heard the sense of Hippostratus in hopeless silence. Two of them were young in both years and experience. They had spent too little time and study experience to discover difficult number sequence. For them, Hipparchus had only granted a brief respite from the fate which awaited them. The third victim, Nicomachus, was an older and wiser man. Recently, he had been experimenting with the number sequence which he had not been able to solve himself. The thought of Hippopotamus was and others trying to find a solution gave him a great deal of satisfaction. The first victim presented the following problem. The following numbers are hexagonal numbers because the units of each number can be arranged to form a regular hexagon. Find the next two hexagons. 7, 19, 37. So what are the two numbers after that? In 2 days, the scholars of Philotas secretly hired by Hippopotamus had the answer. This solution is shown below. And as you can see the numbers right here, and I'll read them off. 7, 19, 37. The next two boxes are 61 and 91. So victim 1 was sown to the lions at sundown of the second day. The second victim presented the following problem. The following are called stellate numbers because the units can be arranged to form stars. Find the next two numbers, 8, 21, and 40. Okay, I'm going to cover up the result, but this is what the stellate numbers look like. So 8, 21, and 40. So what happened was basically, so what happens, what are the next two numbers? Well, they found the next two numbers to be 65 and 96. Victim 2 was tossed in the elephant pit at sunrise of the fifth day. Nicomachus, the third victim, presented the following problem. The following numbers I have not named as yet. However, if they succeed, as I think they will, there's only one suitable name, perfect numbers. Each is the sum of all the integer factors which divide into it evenly. The first such number is 6 because the factors 1, 2, 3 add up to 6. The second is 28 because the factors 1, 2, 4, 7, and 14 add up to 28. The third is 496 because the factors 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 31, 62, 124, 248 add up to 496. What are the next two? So the numbers here is 6, 28, 496. Continuing, history is vague about what happened. An ancient tablet found in the 3rd century BC contained the following inscriptions, which provide some of the outcome. Of the city of Philotas is a writ, wise men found nothing that people waited for years till cheers turned to jeers. At the end, the arrogant judge who first bore the grudge found death in the snake vault and honor came to the cult. Now, the last part of the chapter is write a Fortran program to find other perfect numbers. Keep in mind that the factors I used here are exact divisors starting 1, but not including number itself. Evaluate your game by referring to box score 5. So, what does this historical account mean? Well, it means that basically a group doesn't groupthink, thought they knew everything, and someone who spoke opposite views, like, well, maybe we should call ceasefire, maybe we should rediscuss a peace, maybe we should be true to ourselves as to what's really happening in this situation, and especially people are going to suffer during the winter. Well, they were considered the cult. They may be considered the cultists, and somebody tried to throw them to alliance or cancel them as in the woke culture or something else. That's not what happens. It showed that basically, even though the person was basically considered maybe not with the in group of the leadership, his ideas and solutions were valid. It showed that the in group doesn't have all the solutions. Just like when one political party says, "Well, the Democrats have all the solutions," logically that's a fallacy that can easily be disproven because all ideas do not exist in one group, and also most new ideas come from people who are described as lone wolves, part of an out group, outsiders, and that though. Now, finally, just to give an example, of what is the damage to all this when we think about this groupthink and other things? Dry 1965 revisited. Now this goes back to a book that I first read in 1982, Ghetto Etrumbach by Douglas Hofstadter. It took me a long time to do the first reading because it is very deep. And I actually spoke at UW Parkside at that time on artificial intelligence. But let me read from page 382, Mind and Thoughts. Potential beliefs, potential symbols. It is my contention that chunk description is possible, but when we get it, all will not suddenly be clear and light. The problem is that in order to pull a chunk description of the brain state, we need a language to describe our findings. Now, the most appropriate way to describe a brain would be to enumerate the kinds of thoughts it could entertain and the kinds of thoughts it could not entertain, or perhaps to enumerate its beliefs and the things which it does not believe. If that is the kind of goal we will be striving for in a chunk description, then it's easy to see what kinds of troubles we might run up against. Suppose you wanted to enumerate all the possible voyages that could be taken in an ASU. There are infinitely many. How do you determine which ones are plausible, though? Well, what does plausible mean? Will we have precisely this kind of difficulty in trying to describe what is the possible pathway from solution to symbol in the brain? We can imagine an upside down dog flying through the air with a cigar in his mouth, or collision between two giant fried eggs on a freeway, or any other number of ridiculous images. The number of far-fetched pathways which can be followed in a brain is without bound, but just as the number of insane itineraries that could be planned as an ASU, but just what constitutes some sane itinerary given as an ASU? And just what constitutes a reasonable thought given a brain state? The brain state does not forbid any pathway because for any pathway there are certain circumstances which could force the following of that pathway. The physical status of the brain, if read correctly, gives information telling not which pathways could be followed, but rather how much resistance would be offered along the way. Very important point. How much resistance would be offered along the way? And when we have decision making made without resistance, where basically we have a salon that says, "Oh, we have a speaker who's made to be other people made to feel like, oh, he walks on water, he does not bleed, he can speak in his secret language but not speak in English." Sorry, I'm too old for that. Many people are too mature to not be caught in that. And also, like I said before, when people speak and hide behind an interpreter, you lost me. And although most of my shows I speak in English, I'm fluent in many languages, and also I'm fluent in many Slavic languages. So even when this one person speaks in Ukraine, I can tell when the interpreter is reading from a script and not reading from a script. And it's the same thing with President Putin when he spoke. I actually liked it better when he had his first interpreter, who was a professional woman that did his interpretation, because she interpreted more of what he was actually trying to say rather than interpreting from a script. But again, and then when this thing about attacking preemptive strike on Moscow got caught by the press that's not managed or fake. And then suddenly this person can suddenly speak in English. Surprise, surprise, surprise. As Gomer Pyle would say, well, okay, if you could speak in English, why wouldn't you speak in English before? You have 2 degrees. You have an advanced degree, as well as Putin has 2 degrees, an advanced degree. Part of being an advanced degree is you're supposed to know more than one language other than your native language. And that though, and I know many friends who took as a second language learning how to speak in American Sign Language, and that though. And as a professional, even in medical science and computer science, I am proficient in over 300 computer languages. In medical science, I am proficient in over at least 12 spoken languages, even to the point of being able to have a moderate understanding of Chinese, Mandarin, as Mandarin, Japanese, and even parts of and also Korean. So basically, but when I speak though, there's a reason why I speak in English because basically English to try to reach the greatest number of people. However, when I communicate and by papers or letters, I actually communicate as to the old diplomatic protocol of writing the same letter in French. So I communicate by presenting the letter, same letter in English and French, because that is the old diplomatic protocol, and that is the way to prevent people from hiding behind interpreters. Well, no, winter's coming in Wisconsin. Yesterday we had our first freeze. It's 26 degrees Fahrenheit last night. A lot of people turned the heat on, put on the comforters, had some hot coffee, and like you can see me wearing a sweater, undershirt, and we're prepared. But no, we do think of our friends in Europe, Ukraine, Russia, and worldwide, those who are being sucked into this big whirlpool. Where we could get into to something bigger if we're stupid, and that though, and I hope this time we're not, because in 68 even people who are 17 and 21 on both sides of the Iron Curtain realized that a paradigm change was occurring, like those that were in Prague and other parts, basically in Eastern Europe at that time, and even those in the European United States realized there's a change, that we had to change our way of thought. Um, let's hope that what I read about the Johnson administration 1965, that we can end this by its head revisited strategic thinking, that we're going to really get to solving this problem and addressing the real issues of this problem. Because um, to people, students in Europe, I'm going to talk like a professor, and I'm talking like the way one professor talked to us when we were 17. He was a Republican professor, and what happens? He was sort of hated by the school board because he wasn't a Democrat, and he wouldn't knee jerk to the Democratic Party. But what happened was, also, he wasn't a hawk. He is actually a humanist, and he said this. He said, because we asked him, so well, and I'm not going to give his name because based on the woke culture, I don't want him attacked. He's a very nice old man. He does wonderful things for the local community around here, and he really should be given a humanitarian award for the work he's done during his career and even after he retired. Um, we asked him, so well, why, compared to other history professors, why did you have the class where you allowed us to read multiple books from multiple points of view, and yet you didn't put blinders on us. You didn't try to blind us. You didn't try to force what we could hear. You didn't muzzle us. And he said, here, he says, here's the reason why. Many are 17. Fortunately for your generation, the draft has ended, but there's some of us who fear that the draft may come back someday. So what happens, the reason why I'm teaching this way and why other professors and teachers that are part of my group are teaching this way is because we want to make sure that if you are ever drafted or conscripted, you better darn well know what you're fighting for, and what the truth and lies are, because the first casualty of war is lies, and the second casualty of war is basically second casualty of war is obedience to authority, as by Milgram. And he said, we want to make sure that your generation isn't caught or duped like the way our generation was. And when he meant his generation was the college generation that existed in the 1960s. So let me know what you think. I prefer to be contacted on Twitter. But if you wish for me to go over to Odyssey or Lumbo, please send me a message. I'll set up an account. I'll take a look at the account. Remember, so on Twitter, Diana1A. Just remember Diana1A. Just Diana1N, Diana1A on Twitter. Well, this has been Ideas with Diana, episode 538. And I'd like to thank you for watching. And remember, don't let them muzzle what you hear. Don't let them put blinders on you. Don't let them muzzle your speech. Don't let them blind you. And be strong. Be strong. Be strong. There's a better solution to this than what we're doing. Be strong.